Woo! I finally figured it out. Sorry about that, guys. I was having technical difficulties. Someone accidentally deleted the host name on the radio platform that we use, so I had to look through some manuals to find it. Um, so we're gonna go ahead and jump right in. Hi, guys. I'm Ellis Golden, and this is Barbie: A Comprehensive History. This is actually a re-recording of the 2000s. The show is actually technically over, but the audio for the 2000s got lost. And by that, I mean it wasn't recording in the first place. So I'm doing a re-recording of that. So if anything seems slightly off, just know that that's why. Um, yeah. So I'm gonna get started. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so the 2000s are my favorite decade for sure. It's the decade that I grew up in, and so it's naturally the one that I'm the most knowledgeable in. But it's also the decade where we start getting Barbie movies, which are my favorite part of the Barbie franchise. So, before we get into all of that, first we have to talk about her friends, like we do at the top of every show. So she got some new friends in 2002 through 2004. She had a friend named Kayla, um, who came in either an African American model or a white model with red hair, which I find to be very interesting because she's not just using Kayla's face mold, but she's actually her own separate doll. Yet for some reason, she's like seemingly two different characters, which is very different for the Barbie franchise. And I'm not sure if it was an accident, which is possible. I mean, with so many characters, it's natural that they're going to mess up on a few, or it was intentional. She also got a friend named Summer. Summer exists from 2004 to now. She was and is a very popular model. I actually had a lot of Summer dolls growing up. She has strawberry blonde hair and green or brown eyes. Her face is round and her lipstick is pink. She has a bright smile and big eyes, and this makes her really appealing to a larger crowd because she looks very inviting, and because she doesn't seem to have any sort of like personality necessarily attached to her. Like she doesn't seem to be like mean or conniving or super extroverted. She's just kind of like neutrally positive. People can assign their own ideas of how she interacts a lot easier than, say, the early Barbie models where she looked a little, I don't want to say stuck up, but she looked a little overly confident, let's say. She also got Nikki, who's from 2006 to now. Nikki's an African American doll, and she's gone on to replace Christie's longtime role as one of Barbie's best friends. So now Barbie's two main best friends are Teresa and Nikki. Barbie gets her first frenemy, Raquel, from 2006 to now. Raquel is Korean American and she has a thirst for fame, so she views Barbie as a stepping stone to get there. Barbie's usually naive to Raquel's attempts to steal her spotlight and her boyfriend. Then let's talk about Generation Girls. So we got a few more Generation Girls in the 2000s. In 2000, we got uh, Mary Nakano, and she's Japanese. And we got Blaine Gordon. He has a very surfer-like appearance. I actually had a few Blaine dolls. I preferred his mold as a kid to Ken's. And I'm not really sure why that is. I think it's just because he had a little bit more of like a rougher edge to him. Blaine is brothers with Summer, and they both have very surfer aesthetics, which were very popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it made sense that I preferred his dolls a bit more. Blaine was actually rumored to date Barbie for a bit after her and Ken split up in 2004. And yes, you heard that right. Barbie and Ken did break up in 2004. The split was confirmed on Valentine's Day 2004. which is ironic. I know Valentine's Day, the day of love, is when they broke up. And they had been together at that point for 43 years. The breakup was attributed to quite a few things, as different sources were saying different things. Ken's PR was saying one thing, Barbie's PR was saying another, Mattel was reporting a whole different story. Very interesting. So here are just a few of the things that have said to have occurred. Some said the love had died out. Some said Barbie was ready to marry and Ken wasn't. Others reported the opposite, that Ken was ready to marry and Barbie wasn't. And others reported that Barbie was just too busy with her career her careers, definite emphasis on the multiple, to really have enough time to spend with Ken. In 2006, Ken got a makeover by Philip Block in an attempt to try and win back Barbie. But as they were still not together after that point, I'm assuming the attempts were unsuccessful. Then we have the Mycene dolls. These dolls were actually made to compete with Bratz, because Bratz were actually the only other doll to ever truly challenge Mattel. So as we discussed on the 80s episode, when I talked about the story of Barbie and the Rockers, the Jem and the Holograms doll, had they come out before Barbie and the Rockers, may have very well been a huge threat. But because the Barbie marketing team had a little sleuth on the inside, figured out and rushed Barbie and the Rockers to market, it wasn't a challenge. But with the Bratz dolls, they really didn't see them coming, and it filled this perfect void that consumers saw the Barbie franchise as, because of the fact that Barbie was the head, a white Barbie to be specific. Consumers didn't really view Barbie as a multicultural brand. And by this point, since the 80s, they'd had black Barbies. And I'm not talking about Barbies that are black. They'd had those since just a few years after Barbie was created in the first place. So they had black Barbies in the 60s. But when I mean black Barbies, I mean Barbie herself. The character Barbie also came in black versions and later Asian versions and all sorts of different versions. But people still viewed Barbie, when you think of Barbie, I mean, even now you think of white, round-faced girl with pink accessories. And this image slowly built up. That's not how Barbie was in the beginning. She was white, but she wasn't round-faced, and she wasn't wearing pink. But Bratz just filled this market of, they were all racially ambiguous, and they really tapped into that market, because the thing is that studies have shown time and time again that kids are much more likely to go after a doll that looks like themselves, that they can project themselves onto. And so with more white Barbie dolls than black or Hispanic, etc., more racially diverse kids were much more likely to go for a Bratz doll. So in response, Mattel created the Mycene dolls, and I'm just going to go ahead and read out their names really quick. In 2002, we had Madison and Chelsea. In 2003, we had Noli, Bryant, Hudson, Ellis, River, Sutton, and Delancey. In 2004, we had Kinsey, and in 2005, we had Lindsay. And the majority of these dolls were also racially ambiguous. They weren't all, but the majority for sure. The ways that they looked similar to Bratz was in the racial ambiguity. They also had big eyes and full lips. And they did have smaller noses than the typical Barbie doll that did. But they still had noses. If you guys grew up with the Bratz dolls, you know how big their heads are, how big their eyes are, how big their lips are, and their complete lack of having a nose. The Mycene dolls kind of took this idea and morphed it with Barbie, and I think that the result is really pretty. I actually really like the design of these better than a lot of Barbie dolls and better than all Bratz dolls. Um, Obviously, that is a completely subjective opinion. I just personally find them a little bit cooler. But the thing is that even if kids individually thought that they looked better than the Bratz dolls, they were still much more likely to go for a Bratz doll because at this point it's the name brand. No one knows My Scene dolls. So, kids are interested in having what all their friends have, so they would ask their parents for a Bratz doll. So the My Scene dolls, while a smart marketing choice, just weren't a big success. Then we have the Mystery Squad. When I think of the Mystery Squad, I think like cheesy early 2000s girly spies. I'm hacking into the mainframe type vibe. Um, and these were in 2001, so it makes sense that early cheesy 2000s. Um, and they were Drew, Kinsey, and Shawnee. Um, and by the way, I should mention that unless just go ahead and assume that when I'm listing names, I'm not including Barbie, but Barbie is included in these lines. Barbie was not in the My Scene collection, and she's not in a few other collections, but she tends to be in almost every collection that I go over. Um, so just go ahead and, imagine that she's included in those names, but it would get a little redundant if I constantly was like, and Barbie. Then we had the One Modern Circle dolls. These were a collection of dolls with modern, aka early 2000s, clothes, but 1959 inspired face molds and makeup. In 2003, we had Simone and Melody. And then 2004, we had Blaine and Summer. Then we had Model of the Moment. These were high fashion collector dolls, and because of that, their clothes were really difficult to take off because they were more for collection and less for play. These came out in 2004 and they included Daria, Marissa, and Nichelle. Um, and like I was saying about their clothes, they were more difficult to take off, and this was because they had really bended elbows, um, and different proportions than a typical Barbie doll. So they weren't really made to be played with and had their clothes interchanged. Their bodies were a lot more high fashion, um, because they were really just for like adult collector display. Then we have the Fashion Fever dolls. These came in round plastic containers, and their main focus was their fashion, which is very 2000s. And so, because of their fashion, um, these round containers were see through almost all the way around, so that the customer could look at their outfit before buying them because that was really only their main appeal. They weren't like themed and they weren't really different. Um, it was just more so you get the doll and you get the different clothes and then you could just, you know, interchange those clothes around. And this isn't really a collection I'm a huge fan of, just because of the fact that there's not really like a direct incentive for the kids to get them because they didn't even come with multiple outfits. Um, but again, that's more of a personal opinion. In 2004, we had Drew and Desiree. And in 2005, we had Courtney, Jillian, Kurt, Desiree again, Shannon, Tia, and Kira. Then we have the American Idol dolls. These dolls were made to be American Idol contestants, so they were really posable and came with many accessories like a tiny karaoke machine with discs that actually worked. Barbie's version saying "Oops, I did it again," just in case you need a reminder that we were in the early 2000s. The 2005 series came with Tori and Simone and, like I said earlier, Barbie. The Sew and Style, aka Sis collection, as we touched on last week in the 90s decade, this entire collection consisted solely of black dolls and their siblings, and they expanded them a little bit in 2009. Um, they had Grace, who was a friend of Barbie. Um, oh, excuse me. Let me redo that because I actually am all scrambled up because now I've done the 2010s and the 2020s since this. So, yeah, I'm a little scrambled. So then we had the Sew and Style, aka Sis dolls, and this was an entire collection consisting solely of black dolls and their siblings. In 2009, we had Grace, who was a friend of Barbie and how it linked to the greater narrative. Um, then we had Courtney, who is a little sister of Grace, Kara, who's a friend of Grace, Kiana, who is the little sister of Kara, Trishelle, who is a friend of Grace, and Janessa, who is the little sister of Trishelle. Stacy got a few more friends, so she got Lila from 2004 to 2005, and she actually started out by being called Miranda, but this was changed pretty quickly. She came in the We Three Friends set, which is a play on words, because like we, W-E, three friends, but it's spelled W-E-E, so as in like us three small friends. And she came in this collection with Stacy and Janet next to her. And Lila is actually Midge's sister. Stacy actually had blonde hair at this time, just like Barbie. She didn't yet have her signature strawberry blonde, orangish hair. Francie got a few friends, which that isn't a name that we've heard in a while. She got Becky in 2009, and this was in honor of Barbie's 50th anniversary. So Mattel created Becky, who had very 60s inspired facial molds and clothes, but she had kind of a mixture of 60s and 70s clothes. She kind of took inspiration from like all the earlier Barbie decades. And she came with many bright and beautiful outfits and accessories. Then we have Kelly's friends. In 2000, we had Liana and Belinda. 2001, we had Chelsea, not to be confused with the Chelsea that will come later, aka replace the name of Kelly. 2002, we had Lorena. 2003, we had Kirsty and Ryan Sherwood, and this is actually Midge and Alan's eldest child, which we'll be talking about in just a second. In 2006, we had Gia, and 2007, we had Kayla, who is Asian American, and Miranda. So the name Miranda did end up being used again. So Midge and Alan ended up having a family, and as I discussed in the 90s, they got married then, so they were the first like Barbie characters to actually have a wedding or get married, and they were the first Barbie characters to have children other than the adults like Barbie's own parents. Their set was called the Happy Family, and they came in multiple other races too. This is a statement pulled directly from one of the Wikipedia pages that I want to read out for you that I find very interesting. Midge's children are not canon anymore due to Mattel's troubles and controversies around the various pregnant Midge dolls. And we'll get to be talking about that very soon. So keep in mind that these children aren't canon anymore, but in the early 2000s they were. So we have Ryan Sherwood, who's Midge and Alan's son and eldest child, and he came out in 2002. We have Nikki Sherwood, Midge and Alan's oldest daughter, who came out in 2003. And she started out as a baby before growing into a toddler. And this is it's one of the only dolls to do this. I've seen this happen with only a few other Barbie dolls where their molds start out being younger and eventually get a little bit older. And she's actually the first toddler Barbie I've ever seen, and I think is the only toddler Barbie anymore. And by this, I mean we have baby Barbies and we have like 4-year-old Barbies, but we don't really get to see like the 2-year-old, 3-year-old stage. And she is so cute. These dolls are so cute, but they're super rare because they didn't make a lot and they only came in the Happy Family sets. Then there's Cassandra Sherwood, and this is Midge and Alan's youngest daughter, and she came out in 2004, and she's a fully fledged baby. Then we had Grandma Hadley. This is Midge and Lila's mother, and she came out in 2003. Grandpa Hadley, Midge and Lila's father, who also came out in 2003. Lila, Midge's sister and Stacy's friend. And Scott, Alan's brother. And if you remember from before, Scott was actually Skipper's boyfriend for a while. Then we have Midge and Alan's neighbors. These were a small set that didn't even actually have their own names. They were just more so to expand the Happy Family set. They came out in 2004, and there's Mom, aka New Neighbor Mom, Dad, aka New Neighbor Dad, and New Neighbor Baby and New Neighbor Daughter. And they had similar molds to the Happy Family themselves, especially the baby and the daughter. Now let's get into the controversies. In a weird, sadistic way, this is one of my favorite sections to talk about. In 2003, we have Happy Family Midge. She's pregnant, and people said that Midge was too young to be pregnant and that the doll might encourage teen pregnancy. Whereas others were horrified by the fact that her stomach was detachable and retachable by a magnet, and it would have a little baby inside of her belly that could be removed. I saw this doll as a kid. My friend had one, and apparently I had one. I really don't think I did. Mom says I did. I don't think so. I remember playing with my friends, but I don't remember having one myself. I didn't see a problem with this as a kid at all, but I could totally see as a parent being like a little concerned by the visual of it, for sure. But I don't really get the teenage pregnancy concerns, as Midge is not supposed to be a teenager at this point, and she's already married, and it was definitely like a planned pregnancy. So I don't really see kids looking at a pregnant doll and being like, yeah, I'm gonna grow up and get pregnant unexpectedly young. Like that, I just don't see the connection there. In 2006, we have Barbie FOREVER and Tanner the dog. Tanner could eat his food and then quote unquote poop it out for Barbie to pick it up with her pooper scooper. While some found the toy to be crude, the real issue were actually the tiny loose magnet poops that became a choking hazard. Thus, the toy was actually recalled. Obviously the magnets are a big issue, so it totally should have been recalled. And while the poop toy may seem like a little crude, this was so in style. I can't tell you how many like poop themed toys I had. Like for Easter, there'd be like a rabbit that you'd fill with jelly beans and they would like poop them out. I don't know what it was with our obsession in the early 2000s with poop themed toys, but they were totally in. So I could totally see Barbie, the company, cashing in on that. In 2008, there was Barbie totally styling tattoos, and some parents were upset that this might encourage kids to get tattoos, even though the tattoos Barbie were using were temporary. I don't really see a problem with this. However, what I'm going to say next, I do actually kind of see a problem with. Others were upset that the Ken tramp stamp temporary tattoo that she came with was a little too risque. And I have to agree. I mean, obviously, I don't think there's anything wrong with the tramp stamp tattoo. But I do think it's a little weird for a kid's toy. It's just kind of unnecessary, and that's so, like, weird. It's just kind of weird, honestly. It's just like a weird thing to put in a kid's toy. So I totally get, like, where parents were coming from being upset about that. And then the sets, there's an early 2000s Victorian style pastel Barbie dream house that is my actual dream house. Like, I've never really thought of like what my dream house would be because I'm pretty much into any house that's kind of like unconventional, but I can't even begin to describe how cute this house is. Please look up Barbie early 2000s Dream House and it should come up and you'll see what I mean. It's so cute. Rather than describe the dolls this week, I'm actually going to go more in depth about the Barbie movies. And in the YouTube video that I'll be posting for this, I'll add in photos of the Barbie movie dolls that came out during this time because those are really the most unique dolls that came out during the early 2000s. So in 2001, we have Barbie and the Nutcracker, and this is Barbie's first movie, other than the short Barbie and the Rockers, like old VHS tapes, but most people don't really count those as being Barbie movies, just mostly due to their length. This was a Barbie retelling of the Nutcracker, but they were speaking in this, which I totally get because, most kids don't want to sit through like a long movie or play or musical or anything where there's not speaking, it's just dancing. Um, I'm actually not a huge fan of this movie. I know a lot of people that are into the traditional Barbie movies like myself really tend to like this movie, but I just don't. I think it's kind of all over the place. Like narratively, they add in some things that are just kind of like unnecessary, and there's just a lot about this movie that just feels a little scattered. They hadn't quite perfected the recipe yet. Tim Curry is a voice actor in the movie though, so that's fun. In 2002, we have Barbie as Rapunzel, and this is a Barbie retelling of Rapunzel. This movie is really sweet and one I quite like. There's not really much to say about it though. It doesn't really go like far off from the original retelling, and it's really sweet and a really nice movie to kind of fall asleep to. And that kind of sounds like an insult, but I swear it's not. It's just a very comfort movie. It's not really one that I would put on if I was going to show someone Barbie movies. In 2003, we had Barbie of Swan Lake, and I feel pretty much the exact same way about Swan Lake as I do about Rapunzel, though I think I like Rapunzel just a tad bit more. In 2004, we had Barbie as the Princess and the Pauper, and this is my all-time favorite Barbie movie, and one of my favorite Barbie movies, one of my favorite movies, period, ever. I used to watch this every single day. I mean every single day for years. When we would go on trips, I would take the portable DVD player and I'd watch it in the car. I actually went as both Annalise and Erica for two separate Halloweens, meaning one day I went as Annalise, another day I went as Erica, and I did that for 2 years because I couldn't pick which one's my favorite. And to this day, I still really can't pick which one's my favorite. I had the castle, all the dolls, and all the sets. I even named my real life cat Serafina when I got her at age 4. This movie's music genuinely holds up, and so do all of its messages. I think that this movie could be turned into a Broadway musical and you wouldn't have to change anything. Kind of in the same vein that like a lot of Disney movies now are Broadway musicals, like Frozen. I just think that all the music in the movie, it's just really well done overall, especially writing wise. They don't speak down to the kids watching, and I really appreciate that. Kids can figure out what's going on from context clues if they don't understand every single vocabulary word, and then they'll eventually start to learn what the vocabulary is and expand their comprehensive skills. So I think that that's really good. I love kids movies that don't talk down to their audience. More so than any other Barbie movie prior to this time, this movie really started introducing feminist concepts. What I mostly mean is that the women really save themselves, and while both of the female leads do get married, there's nothing wrong with that obviously, but while they both get married to their male counterparts, it's not just simply because of the fact that they're their male counterparts, that's what they're quote unquote supposed to do. It's because they actually have chemistry, and the like let me give an example. So Erica, who is a pauper, she's very poor, actually ends up being proposed to by King Dominic, who is a king, and she actually turns him down because she realizes that she wants to go and sing around the world first. And she tells him, it's not fair for me to ask you to wait, but if you do, then, I would love to marry you, but I have to go do this for me first. And she goes around the world and she sings, and then she eventually comes back home, and he had waited for her, and they get married. And so it's just like this beautiful, just everything about it. I could go on and on, obviously, but it's just great. It's a great movie for sure, and I love its messages. In 2005, there was Barbie and the Magic of the Pegasus, and this is an original Barbie story with very strong feminist concepts. The themes of this movie are relatively dark and actually used to scare me a bit as a kid, but now it's actually my second favorite Barbie movie. The music, as always, is wonderful. It's by the Czech Philharmonic Orchestra, as all the older movies are. And while this movie isn't a musical, the use of classical compositions really ties it together. The relationship in the story is believable and not just there because she's a girl and he's a boy. In 2005, we have Barbie Fairytopia. This is another one of my favorite Barbie movies, and this movie emphasizes bravery and loving your differences. This whole franchise is actually strongly queer-coded, with Alina being coded to be a lesbian, as well as Azura and the villain Laverna. So Azura represents the path Alina eventually chooses to take, which is that to not grow bitter due to the harassment and bullying she endures for being a wingless fairy, aka symbolism for being gay and different. And instead of like becoming a bad person herself due to the harassment like Laverna becomes, she actually taps into the rainbow in her eyes, which means that she's destined for greatness. I literally could not write this. The entire whole thing is that she's got the rainbow in her eyes, which, as you know, a rainbow is a symbolism for being gay. And so yeah, it's very queer coded. And again, I could go on about how it's queer coded, but I think you guys get the picture. As a reward for saving the Enchantress, Alina is gifted with wings. In 2006, the Barbie Diaries came out, and most Barbie movie fans, including myself, don't really count this movie as being a quote Barbie movie due to its drastic change in both style and subject matter. In 2006 also, we have Barbie and the 12 Dancing Princesses. This is another adaptation of a story, but it still has its own twist. This movie has a mixture of classic compositions and original ones. And this is another one of my favorite Barbie movies. And I really appreciate the themes of sisterhood. The only part of this movie that doesn't really hold up is the parrot of the love interest character's stereotypical Indian accent. Yikes. And then finally in 2006, we have Barbie Mermaidia, and this is a sequel to Fairytopia, in which Alina must travel to Mermaidia in order to save Prince Nalu, who she met in the first movie. Nori, a mermaid she meets, who goes from enemies to friends, is bi-coded. There's a solid amount of queer baiting going on here, with Alina and Nori seeming to end up together, but Nori ultimately ends up with Nalu. And Alina stays single, which I think is a good choice for them to have Alina stay single, and as you'll see, she continues to. This is another one of my favorite Barbie movies. It's probably my third favorite Barbie movie if I had to pick. Then in 2007, we had Barbie as the Island Princess. Other than the odd underlying colonization, different islander themes, this movie is actually really sweet, and the songs are fun and cute. Unlike Princess and the Pauper, this movie musical doesn't really hold up well technically, but it's still really fun for kids and nostalgic adults like me. It's one I occasionally come back to, even though Tika, the elephant, is my least favorite Barbie character of all time. She's so annoying. Then, Barbie Fairytopia Magic of the Rainbow also came out in 2007, and this is the third and final Fairytopia movie. It follows a high school slash college type narrative, and for this reason, it's my least favorite of the series, but it's still a movie I really enjoy. Once again, rainbow symbolism is really prominent, and Alina remains single and queer coded. In 2008, we have Mariposa, and Mariposa takes place in the same universe as Fairytopia, but in a different area called Flutterfield, where the butterfly fairies live. Alina is narrating this story, and it's a cute story of following your instincts. Also in 2008, we have Barbie and the Diamond Castle, and this is Barbie's first quote-unquote friendship movie, but many fans have pointed out, and actually point out even in the Wikipedia articles, the many ways in which this movie is not even subtly a story of two girlfriends. They live in a house together, reject the male leads, sing songs together about loving each other, have heart-shaped matching necklaces, etc., etc. One wears a dress with the colors of the bisexual flag, and the other wears a dress with the colors of the lesbian flag. One moment that really captures just how gay-coded this story is when the two girls on a rainbow bridge, which is receding away from the land where the two guys that have been pining after them stand. One of the guys turns to the other and asks, "What's wrong with that picture?" And the other replies, "Everything." So yeah, this movie's not even subtly gay-coded. And it's really cute, and the stories are really good too. Yeah. I definitely, in rankings of Barbie movie musicals, I think it's my second favorite. In 2008, we have Barbie in A Christmas Carol, and this is a retelling of the story of A Christmas Carol, but with female leads. It's one of the many movies I make sure to watch around Christmas time, which is a high honor because I have quite a tight schedule trying to fit in all the Christmas movies I like. Also in 2000, oh, not also. In 2009, we have Barbie Thumbelina. With a weird art style and cringy writing, this is a Barbie movie I've refused to watch more than, I think, 2 times. Once when I was a kid, and then once recently when I rewatched all the Barbie movies. And finally, also in 2009, we have Barbie and the Three Musketeers. While this Barbie movie is a good adaptation in theory, with classic animation style and subject matter, the actual movie is quite boring and drags on a bit. It's a movie I find myself zoning out in, so it's not really one I like to rewatch. And if you like me talking about the Barbie movies, I actually, I believe, yes, the summer of no, 2 years ago, no, wow, summer of 2019, I did an entire podcast with my friend Camille where we watched every single Barbie movie in the month leading up to it, and then we talked about every single Barbie movie for like 2 hours. So if you're interested in that, that's on my YouTube channel, Ellis Golden Music, where I upload all of these. So if you could scroll back a little bit in my videos or search Ellis Golden Barbie podcast, it should be one of the results that shows up. In 2003, the Build Lily case is reopened, and they actually lose this time. As always, I'm going to list Barbie's careers. In 2000, we have her being a paratrooper. In 2000 also, we have United States President. In 2001, she's a movie star, a Spanish language teacher. And then 2002, she's a See's candy cashier, an art teacher. In 2004 to present, she's a fashionista. Also in 2004, she's a paramedic and a presidential candidate. In 2005, she's a Canadian Mountie, a producer, and a swim teacher. In 2006, she's a cheerleader, an elementary school teacher, a baby photographer, and a ballerina. In 2007, she's a dance teacher, a makeup artist, a secretary. And then in 2008, lots of things in 2008, she's a presidential candidate, a swim teacher, a cheerleader, a cashier, a pediatrician, a TV chef, a designer, a pet stylist, a hairdresser, and a veterinarian. And then 2009, she's a veterinarian again, a singer, a wedding stylist, an aerobics instructor, a SeaWorld trainer, oof, that aged bad when Blackfish came out in 2013, and a NASCAR driver. Sadly, I'm going to be ending this podcast on some sad news, which is that on April 27th, 2002, Ruth Handler unfortunately passed away at the age of 85 after complications due to her colon surgery that she'd had 3 months prior. She was survived by her husband Elliot Handler and their daughter Barbara Handler. Ruth joins her son Kenneth in the afterlife. Here's a quote about Ruth Handler that I want to end us off on. Ruth had a vision, and when Ruth had a vision, she was unstoppable, Holder said. Ruth didn't pay any mind to a field dominated by men. In my opinion, Ruth dominated the field, not men. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, make sure to listen to the episodes before or the final episode, which is after this one. As always, I'm your host, Ellis Golden, and thank you guys so much for listening. If you want to rewatch this, my YouTube channel is Ellis Golden Music. That's Ellis Golden Music. Ellis like the island, golden like the color, music. And there's visuals with YouTube videos. That's fun. And if you're listening to the YouTube video right now, leave a like and a comment because it means a lot. And as always, the sources that I used in order to do this research will all be down below in the description of the YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much and have a great night.